Welcome again to the third in our fall series, lecture series, focusing on the cost of conflict, the value of peace building. We've had two great speakers in the series so far. Sir Roger Carrick spoke generally on that theme, and last week, Aziris Ruberwa, former vice president of the Democratic Republic of Congo, spoke and gave an update on the situation in Congo and the many challenges they face. And then very much consistent with that theme, we're very happy to bring you John Prendergast tonight, who has worked on many conflicts in Sudan, in addition to others in Central Africa and in other parts of Africa as well. Let me thank you as always for being here. I have to read the little line that says, "My name is," and my name is Rob Brasigliano, for those of you for whom we may not have met. I'm the director of the Institute of World Affairs, working with a great staff. If you haven't met our staff, we've got people in the room here. Susan Yelich-Boniecki, who's our coordinator for the series. Susan, that's it. Doug Savage next to her. Doug, you may know, is the person who will be bringing us Great Decisions, which our series starts in January, and I'll say more about that in a minute. And Rachel and Nicole, who are in the back, if you guys could wave your hands. Thank you very much. It's a very pleasant staff, as you can see. I want to thank a lot of people came together in addition to our staff to make this visit possible, and I want to mention them now. The Darfur Action Coalition. Sachin, where are you? Here somewhere?
The babysitter got locked at the house.
Oh, great. Okay, we had a family emergency. Paula Simon is here. Paula's with the Milwaukee Jewish Council, but also works with the Darfur Action Coalition. The Marquette University Office of International Education. Terry Miller and his group helped to bring Terry in the back. Helped bring John here. Also, the Rotary Club, Milwaukee chapter of the Rotary Club, the A.D. Robertson Fund for the United Nations in particular, whose very generous support helped to make this possible, as well as St. Norbert College, where we're the hosts for John yesterday, up in De Pere in Green Bay. The Wisconsin Governors Commission on the United Nations, our illustrious chair is here, Wolfgang Schmidt. Wolfgang, thank you. Also the chair of the IWA Board of Directors. The Wisconsin United Nations Association, Gary. So a great organization. If those of you who are interested in supporting or joining the UN Association, see Gary. I also want to thank our corporate underwriters, U.S. Bank, the Ziegler Companies, and the Brady Corporation, whose generous support makes all of our programming possible. And, of course, our members. For those of you who are students, membership is free. You can just register with us, and there's lots of benefits that go with that. And also, if you're not a student and you don't have a membership, please see Rachel Schrag. She'll help get that taken care of for you. 10% discount if you do it at tonight's event. So Rachel will deal with all that and be happy to do so. I want to mention a little bit about tonight's program format. And for those of you who have been to the other two events, this is familiar, but it's a change from what we've done in the past. We're going to go with a traditional format till about 7:50 or so. John will give a talk and have some questions here in the group, but then we'll take a short break, and between 8 and 8:45, we'll have a chance for a smaller, or those that would like to stay and have a more informal conversation with John can do so for between 8 and 8:45. Also, the question format, we have a microphone here for those that would like to ask questions in person. We also have forms, which we can take a written question if you'd like to submit your question in writing, and it will find its way up here, and I will ask it to John. I also want a few program notes. This is the last of our fall series events, but there's two other events that the Institute is helping to co-sponsor: a European Business Breakfast on October 30th, which will focus on Switzerland and Luxembourg as avenues into doing business in the European market. Also on Sunday, November 18th, at the Jewish Community Center, is sponsoring a talk by Ambassador Dennis Ross on statecraft and how to restore America's standing in the world. Ambassador Ross has been a fairly frequent visitor here to Milwaukee and always has a great message. As I mentioned, the Great Decisions series is starting up in January. On the 22nd of January is our first event. The theme for the 8-part series, it's every Tuesday, 8 consecutive Tuesdays starting on January 22nd, are great decisions for the next U.S. president. So we're going to focus on 8 core foreign policy issues that we think the next president, whoever they may be, whatever party they may be from, although I think our speaker tonight has a certain view as to which party will win that contest, was going to have to confront these issues. And we're putting together a guide of positions from the campaigns on these various issues, as well as some background information on that. So we're trying to help you understand these various issues, understand where the candidates stand on them, and make your own informed choices as to where to go. The other theme that I want to hit on, which is a part of this series as well as our other work, is this connection between the global and the local. And another really great feature of tonight's topic and speaker and the other organizations that have worked with us on this is that this is an issue that there is a lot of infrastructure ready for you to work with to make a difference on this issue. And from your living room, from your place of worship, from your community group, and John's organization, the Enough Campaign, is certainly one of them. The Darfur Action Coalition is another. There are many that you can look at. And I think Sachin before that passed out postcards on one issue, which is the divestment legislation that is before the Wisconsin state legislature for Wisconsin to divest from companies doing business in Sudan. So let me turn to tonight's main order of business and John Prendergast. John is currently co-chair of the Enough Campaign, which, as I found out today, John has done a lot of work working with at the sort of top levels in government and various peace processes. And Enough, if I paraphrase this, you will probably correct it, was a chance to really deal with the grassroots, which is where a lot of the empowerment and the power to change decisions comes from. So this is a new sort of preoccupation for John, and certainly one I'm sure we'll hear more about. His resume is long and impressive. During the Clinton administration, he was Director of African Affairs at the National Security Council, although you came after the Rwandan genocide, so no responsibility on John for that one. He's also been involved in a number of peace processes throughout Africa, and especially the deal between Ethiopia and Eritrea, as authored or co-authored 8 books, the latest of which he co-authored with the activist Don Cheadle, called Not on Our Watch, which is a New York Times bestseller. He's helping to spearhead a campaign involving the NBA and participant productions to widen awareness on Darfur. He was involved in the making of 2 recent documentaries, which you will be able to see in the near future. One called Darfur Now, which will be in theaters in November, Warner Brothers distributing. And another called Sand and Sorrow, which is premiering on HBO in December. And they're planning to have house parties and discussions around that. So again, another easy avenue to get involved on this issue. He is a visiting professor at the University of San Diego and at the American University in Cairo. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to John Prendergast.
Thanks very much, Rob. I knew that I was in Wisconsin this morning when I heard the following story. Some folks were at Lambeau Field, watching the Packers game a few weeks ago, and they noticed this guy sitting next to an empty seat for the entire game. So there's never any empty seats at Lambeau. So it was really disturbing. They were watching and watching. Finally, they go down there and they say, what's up with this empty seat? How can you sit here and not have anybody with you? And he says, well, my wife used to sit there, but she passed away, sadly. So the guys were like, oh, sorry, but why couldn't you get one of your family members to come with you to the game and sit there? And he responded, well, they're all at the funeral. I'm in Wisconsin. I'm sorry. Good story. It's not my story. I didn't make it up. It's your state. It's your team. All right. Not appropriate. Sorry. Wrong beginning. Let's start up. Rob, you want to do that again? Sorry. Ladies and gentlemen, 2.5 million people in Darfur, in the western part of Sudan, have been rendered homeless by the genocide and the conflict there in western Sudan. That's an almost incomprehensible number. So I want to tell you about just one of those 2.5 million people. Amina lived with her 4 children in a village in North Darfur. And she woke up one morning to the dreaded and terrifying sound of explosions right in the center of her village. The government had sent its high-altitude bombers, and they struck first in the town. Amidst the confusion and the screaming that accompanies such a terrible, terrible atrocity, an even more terrifying sound began to emerge in the distance, and that was the sound of horses, lots of them, which meant that the Janjaweed were coming. Amina collected her 4 children and began to run, literally run for her life. But soon she was overtaken by one of the Janjaweed horsemen. Amina grabbed 2 of her children, one in each arm, and then huddled over the other 2 to protect them. But the militiaman reached down and he ripped 5-year-old Adam right out of Amina's left arm. And before Amina could respond, he flung little Adam into one of the burning huts in the village. Amina had to choose, the most difficult choice in her life, had to choose whether to keep running and try to save her 3 kids that were remaining, or to go into the burning hut to try to save little Adam. But she could hear Adam screaming, "Mother, mother," but she had to run. Now, the family made it another 200 yards or so on the outskirts of the village when they were run down again by another Janjaweed horseman. And this one pulled 7-year-old Assam from her left arm and shot him twice in front of the young boy's mother's eyes. Numb and overcome, Amina kept running with her 2 remaining children in tow. They wandered for 7 days until they finally reached the Chad border. Amina never got to bury her children. We talked when we met on that border between Chad and Darfur. We talked for a long time, all afternoon under the tree. And at the end of our discussion, she looked at me with fire in her eyes. And she said, now that you know, you must do something. And that's right. Amina is absolutely right. Now that we know, now that we all know about what is happening in Darfur, we've gathered tonight here to try to do something. And in order to figure out what to do, what we can do that's most effective, we have to understand a few things, namely what I call the 5 whats. What's happening on the ground in Darfur, what the response has been by the international community, what the international community should do to bring a faster end to the crisis, what the obstacles are to the international community doing what it should be doing, and then finally, 5th, what we can do in this room to overcome those obstacles and help to end this genocide. So what's going on? Why is genocide being committed in the middle of the Sahara Desert? Darfur is one of a number of regions of Sudan, as you can see from the map there. And all of them in the periphery of Sudan have been shut out of power and wealth by the ruling party, which took power in 1989 in a military coup. Southern Sudan, for example, the southern third of the country, fought a war against the ruling party for almost 20 years, which was finally resolved in 2005. Now, Darfur has experienced similar discrimination as the Southerners have, especially the non-Arab peoples of Darfur. They tried to agitate for their rights within the political system of this country of Sudan, but they were further shut out as the central government used the old tactics of playing the ethnic card and dividing and conquering. And they favored Arab groups over non-Arab groups in Darfur in order to maintain power. Finally, some of the non-Arab communities decided to take up arms against the government and start a small-scale rebellion to demand their rights in the context of the state. The government's response was swift and disproportionate and overwhelming. The government armed this loose collection of extremists within the Arab communities called the Janjaweed, which is Darfur's version of the Ku Klux Klan. And they knew that the Janjaweed would be far more draconian. The government knew that the Janjaweed would be far more extreme in the way that they responded and conducted the war than their own army would be. And they gave them instructions. They gave the Janjaweed instructions to loot and to burn and to rape and to kill, to pillage anyone in the way. And they did with rather frightening efficiency, these Janjaweed militias. They were able to burn down about 1,500 villages while this genocide has been ongoing. The strategy is real simple. Drain the water to catch the fish. Any of you who studied military history, any of you who know the art of war, it's the oldest counterinsurgency strategy in the book. You kill the people supporting the rebellion, and likely the rebellion will wither on the vine. And the objective ultimately is to create chaos, to create anarchy, so that the Darfurian communities would fight amongst themselves, ultimately. This is megalomaniacal and murderous behavior, but it's not irrational. It's not random. The government is trying, in the case of Darfur, to maintain power by any means necessary, even if it requires genocidal tactics. And they know, are fairly confident, that the sands of the Sahara Desert will swallow the evidence of what has been, so far, the 21st century's greatest crime. So that takes us to the second question. What has been the world's response to this horror? Now, Amina certainly and her family have not been well served by the global system charged with responding to crises like the one playing itself out in Darfur. The international community, particularly led by the United States, has repeatedly barked but never bitten with respect to action in confronting those responsible for the genocide. We've turned the old Roosevelt line about diplomacy on its head. Rather than walking softly and carrying a big stick, we've walked loudly and carried nothing but a toothpick. The Sudanese government saw right through this, and they realized that they could literally get away with mass murder. This reality has become, I think, to me, all the more tragic in light of the fact that we have reams of evidence over the last 20 years of the life of this regime in Sudan that we can influence its behavior with significant and sustained pressure and robust and committed and deep diplomacy combined, pressure and diplomacy. So the third question that brings us to is then, if we know pressure and diplomacy work, and they've worked before in Sudan in changing the government's behavior, what specifically should we do in Darfur to bring about a change, to bring about an end to the genocide? Well, at the Enough Project where I work, we've looked at war and genocide and mass atrocities and how to bring them to an end, and we found that there are usually three ingredients to bringing about an end to crises of this nature. And we call them the 3 Ps of crisis response, the 3 Ps of genocide prevention. It's peacemaking, protection, and punishment. Those 3 Ps, when applied together simultaneously, usually bring about an end to a conflict rather quickly. Peacemaking, the first P is obvious. You got to address the root causes. You got to get to the root of why conflicts erupt, and then, of course, why genocide is used to tamp out the rebellion and the people who are supporting the rebellion. Second, protection. While you're working assiduously to try to bring about a peace deal, you've got to try and protect the people who are left vulnerable to the attacks by those that are committing genocide. And so finally, after 4.5 years the international community is finally, the United Nations Security Council has finally authorized a peacekeeping force, a protection force to Darfur to protect the people who are in harm's way in that embattled region. So you have peacemaking and protection, which are beginning to be addressed now. Peace talks start at the end of the month in October, and protection force authorized but not yet deployed for the people of Darfur. But then the third P comes in, punishment. We've got to create a cost for the commission of genocide. To give leverage to the peace and protection, you've got to have some kind of a sanction, some kind of accountability for the crimes that have been committed. And there are a number of things that you can do. You can target sanctions on the people that are responsible. You can focus divestment campaigns, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, where you encourage institutions to sell stock of the companies that are doing business in Sudan. And then you can support the prosecution of those most responsible for atrocities such as those that are being committed in Darfur by supporting the International Criminal Court and its investigations into these crimes. So you put these three Ps in action, and I've seen it over and over again in the two and a half decades I've been working on Africa and working in African war zones. They work. I started myself working on this stuff when I was about 20 years old. I saw videos and pictures of a crisis half a world away, just like many of the young people today have seen these pictures in Darfur. And I saw them in the case of the famine that was unfolding in Ethiopia and Eritrea at the time. And my life was forever changed by those images. I got on a plane, had enough money just for about enough money for a one-way ticket, and I've never really looked back. I've learned a lot over these last 25 years of working in these war zones. And the most important lesson that I've learned is that there are solutions to these problems. In fact, I would say our biggest challenge, our biggest obstacle, is that in supporting peace in Africa is the belief that Africa is a continent of despair and a continent of hopelessness. And it's no wonder, when we see very little news coverage, and what we do see is children with flies on their faces. And when we see what comes out of Hollywood, the movies that are focused on Africa, it's no wonder that people think the continent is hopeless. And I want to tell you just a few quick examples of how Hollywood helps shape the attitudes of most Americans about what's happening in Africa, and then compare those movies with the way it really is in those countries today. Look at Blood Diamond, Leonardo DiCaprio, a movie which his character calls the country of Sierra Leone a hell on earth, marked by rebels hacking the limbs off of people and drug-crazed child soldiers press-ganged in the military service. Well, some of that actually happened in the 1990s. It was a tough decade for Sierra Leone. But what's happened, I just went to Sierra Leone last month, 2 months ago, for the elections in Sierra Leone. And what I found was an extraordinary peaceful country that's working to move forward. That an election was held in which a ruling party actually lost the vote and turned over power peacefully to the opposition. The blood diamonds have become clean diamonds. Economic growth rates are positive and growing. And the former child soldiers that I spoke with, and I spoke with a lot of them, are turning their back on the past, the violence that they were forced to commit by these warlords that have now, most of whom have now ended up in international tribunals being tried for crimes against humanity. It's a hell of a success story. You didn't see a postscript at the end of Blood Diamond, the movie, saying, by the way, this was a moment. But there's a lot of great things that are happening in Sierra Leone today. Second movie that fits this pattern is The Lord of War. Nicolas Cage did a movie 2 years ago. where he trudges around war-torn Liberia. And his character calls Liberia the country that God has forsaken. Now, I was also in Liberia last year, and I witnessed Liberians going to the polls in record numbers, well above the rates of participation we have in the United States. And they elected the first female president in all of Africa. The mass murderer who was in charge of the country when their terrible atrocities were occurring and who helped foment the rebellion in Sierra Leone as well, was captured and put in front of an international criminal tribunal. And about 100,000 former child soldiers, Liberian kids, have been demobilized over the last few years and reintegrated back into society. Another movie where you didn't see a postscript at the end saying all these horrible atrocities, in fact, have been turned around in a remarkable transformation. Third movie, Last King of Scotland. Forrest Whitaker wins the Academy Award portraying Idi Amin perpetrating terrible atrocities against Ugandans, particularly in the central part of the country, in an area called the Luwero Triangle. I was just there 3 months ago. Luwero Triangle, the area where he was committing these depredations, has one of the highest economic growth rates in the world. Education has been prioritized in that area. Primary schools free, secondary schools free. All kinds of opportunities are being created for post-secondary school for the kids living in that area. There certainly still is conflict in northern Uganda, but neighboring countries and the international community are working on resolving that as well. It's a success story. It's a turnaround. Fourth case, I could go on, by the way. Fourth case is, the fourth movie is the one that many of us have seen, and some of us got engaged in Darfur because of it, Hotel Rwanda. As with the other three, you have an actor, in this case my co-author Don Cheadle, realistically portraying a moment in history, in this case in Rwanda's embattled history. But of course these movies all focus on the most dramatic, the most extreme moments of the country's history. And again, no postscript at the end of the film to explain what's happening now in Rwanda today. The Rwanda I just saw from my last visit there in April. There's a country that is focusing assiduously on reconciliation. They have the highest percentage of female parliamentarians in the entire world. And they have an impressive economic growth rate. And with every passing month, they have a diminishing prospect of a return to the madness of 1994's genocide. The point of this, and I hope it's all obvious by now, is that Africa, contrary to popular perception, is not a continent of despair. It is a continent of hope, and the capacity for transformation seems to me rather limitless. So I've given you now 3 Ps and 4 movies, and it all seems like a piece of cake. Why can't we just apply these lessons and to Darfur, end the genocide, pat ourselves in the back, and head on home? Well, that leads us to the fourth question. What are the obstacles? What is the reason why we're not doing the right thing in Darfur? Why we haven't done the right thing in Darfur? You all probably didn't know when you picked Darfur as a place you wanted to learn a little bit more about or wanted to get active on. But Darfur is a very, very special place where the obstacles to international action are inordinately and incomparably, in fact, high for Africa. In Darfur, we run right smack into the middle of 3 of the great issues of our time: Iraq, terrorism, and energy security. Iraq is obvious. Darfur, the conflict in Darfur erupted the same month that the U.S. invaded Iraq, and that massive sucking sound you hear in Washington, anytime you get near Washington, that sound of all of the energy and the resources and attention being focused on the Iraq crisis makes it much more difficult for any other issue to get airtime on the radar screen of our policymakers. So it just makes it much more difficult to do anything about anything else. Second issue after Iraq is terrorism. Now, during the 1990s, first half of the 1990s, Osama bin Laden lived in Sudan as a guest of the government of Sudan. And the government of Sudan learned during this period of time a great deal about Al-Qaeda and its affiliates. And you then fast forward, of course, to immediately after September 11, when President Bush says very clearly, you're either with us or you're against us. The Sudanese government made a strategic decision. Let's get on the right side here, and let's provide little bits of information to the United States, and we'll ensure that we won't end up as the next country after Afghanistan to be to receive the attention of the neoconservatives. And so terrorism and Iraq have been fairly significant obstacles for the United States. The third issue that has obstructed international action is, the third factor is energy security. And that path leads right to the door of China. China, of course, is the largest investor in Sudan, in its oil sector. It's invested billions of dollars in the Sudanese energy sector, and it has, as a result of that, and its commercial partnership with the government of Sudan, it's very, very unwilling. It has been very unwilling to challenge the government of Sudan for its human rights abuses in southern Sudan or in Darfur. And in fact, in the southern part of the country where the oil is based, the Chinese have helped construct during the late 1990s and early part of this decade. They helped construct some of the infrastructure that allowed the government of Sudan to make some very, very specific military gains. And so they, in fact, underwrote or helped support the military strategy of the Sudanese government. So these are some pretty serious obstacles, like no other place in Africa, frankly. But despite these obstacles, here we go. Now we're going to move into the good news column. There are major changes afoot in the international system. Let's start with three of them, three countries which are on the move in Sudan. First one, start with the one we just left off, China. After years of tunnel vision, of having one singular focus, which is to maximize energy production, dam the torpedoes, complete lack of concern about what kind of repercussions the energy development would have on the people of Sudan. The Chinese government suddenly has to care. And it has to care because it's made a fundamental decision. For the 2008 Beijing Olympics, the Chinese government wants to present a new face to the world. It wants to say that the government of China has changed. It's much more open, and it does not want issues like the genocide in Darfur to scar its new image. So quietly, slowly, behind the scenes, China has shifted from the category of major problem in Sudan to one, at least beginnings, to have the beginnings of a constructive actor written on it. And so they're by no means yet as far along as they need to be, and we need to keep making noise about what's happening in Sudan and the impact that China's investments have on it. But we have seen an effect, and now is the time to increase the temperature, increase the pressure on China for what it's doing. So China is the first bit of good news. The second bit of good news is France. Here's a country that for years has been problematic on Sudan and constantly opposing further action in the United Nations Security Council. And suddenly, in the early part of this year, a new president was elected in France who has prioritized Darfur and also made an important priority the improvement of relations with the United States and cooperation with the U.S. on specific problems such as Darfur. And President Sarkozy has begun to work very closely with Prime Minister Gordon Brown in Great Britain, the new Prime Minister there, to work together to find solutions to the situation in Sudan. So China and France, two major important new developments on the horizon. And then there's our government itself, the Bush administration here in the United States. Against all odds, the activists all across the United States, groups rooted in churches and synagogues and universities, African American organizations, all kinds of human rights groups, together have created, collectively and individually, the first movement that has existed, that has sprung up in response to a genocide, while a genocide is actually still ongoing. For me, after working for 25 years in this field, it's an extraordinary thing to see, to actually see this movement unfold. And most people who are part of it, four corners of the country, most people who are part of it have never been to Darfur and they never met a Darfurian, but they get involved because it matters to them that we're doing nothing in the face of the world's greatest crime, genocide. So the Bush administration finally has taken notice. It's in the context of next year's elections, certainly, and particularly as a result of pressure from evangelical leaders and Jewish organization leaders who are saying to this administration, it matters to us as voters, what you're doing, and the sort of gap between rhetoric and action. And so you have a united Congress and a number of significant national organizations pressing very, very hard, and you have an activist grassroots base that is becoming larger and larger and wider, pressing forward with for a new policy on Sudan. But with this little bit of success that we have, particularly with respect to the Bush administration, with respect to China, it won't be sustained unless we push even harder, unless the temperature is raised just a little bit higher. The noise gets a little bit louder directed at our government to help to end the crisis. We need to make a very clear signal to our administration, to our elected officials, that as voters, it matters to us how they respond to genocide and how the extent to which they are committed to bringing about peace in Sudan. And because ultimately, I think, and what I've learned is policy is certainly a political equation, and the squeakiest wheels in Washington get the most grease. And if we can squeak loudly enough, we're going to get additional action for the cause that we care about, no matter what it is. So how do we increase this decibel level? And that's where we come to our fifth and final question. What is our role here in this room, and how can we raise the temperature? How can we overcome the obstacles? How can we move our government forward to the point where it actually acts on its promises and acts on with this gravity commensurate with the invocation of the term genocide? Well, I think there are a number of things we can do, and I will give you today just 5 things that any one of us can do in 15 minutes or less, because I really think we have lots of things going on in our lives, and if there are bite-sized morsels that any of us can take and we can suggest to our friends and family members these kinds of things, we can actually bring about a change on the ground in Darfur. Thanks. I got the Clinton thing. Thank you very much. First thing you can do is join the movement. There are a bunch of different organizations that focus on Darfur. There's the Save Darfur Coalition that brings together 180 different groups all over the United States. That is, I think, something that has an activist network that on a weekly basis they'll send you an email and say, this is the kind of things you can do, and you can just respond. You can just If you don't feel like, don't have your 15 minutes particular week, just delete it. If you have your 10 or 15 minutes, you can do it, whatever they're asking. And they're always plugged into the specifics of the legislative or the executive branch urgencies of the moment. The second thing you can do is the old-fashioned way of influencing your congressperson or senator is you can write, and call, email, and even bring some people, get some people together and go meet your senator or congressperson when they come back to the home district. And this is the way that these members quantify citizen sentiment. If they get a surge of letters, they get a lot of emails, if they get calls, they're going to know about it, and they're going to respond to it. It matters to them. It's a supply and demand business. If you demand an action, they'll supply the response. Third thing you can do is call the White House. And there's a switchboard that does the same thing as every congressional office does. They collect the numbers of calls that they get every day on a particular issue. And there's a group of young people that have created a little service which you can call, which gives you a quick briefing of what's going on, and then you press a button and you get transferred to the White House switchboard. It's 1-800-GENOCIDE. If you have that number, you can call it as often as you can, and let the White House know how much it matters to you that the president do all he can to stand up to genocide in Darfur. Again, these things count. Fourth thing you can do in 15 minutes or less is you can write to your local papers. You can write to your local networks. You can let them know that it matters to you, that what they cover and what they focus on is of great concern to you, and that the fact that they're not covering a genocide and what we're doing about that genocide and what your local community here is doing, because there are activities that are going on here, is the kind of thing. And again, we're back to the same economic equation that we have for the political equation of the politicians, supply and demand business. You demand, the media will supply. Fifth and finally, things you can do in 15 minutes or less is get involved in the divestment movement. I mentioned to you that there are a number of actions that can be taken, and I think we can go through them. You guys have the handout as the handout. Everybody has a handout on divestment. But Wisconsin, 20 states now in the United States have divested. What that means is their pension funds, the state pension funds, there's billions of dollars of investments, have sold all of their stocks in companies that do business in Sudan. So Wisconsin has a bill, but it hasn't passed yet. It's still stuck in committee, hasn't been moved out of the committee that's got jurisdiction over it. And so a real hard push, a coordinated push over time, and it doesn't have to be immediate, but over the next few months, we make sure that Wisconsin adds its name to the roll of states that have ensured that their own money is not being used to facilitate genocide in Sudan. So there's lots of stuff you can do that you can do in a very short amount of time to be part of the efforts to bring about an end to this genocide. And as much as you can do, you can also send emails to your family and friends and let them know what you're doing and what they can do to make a difference in Sudan to end the genocide. If we make enough noise, if we squeak loudly enough, we can be part of a movement all over the United States that can lead to the end of the 21st century's first genocide. And I think we must raise our voices as loudly as we can for Amina and her family, for Darfur, and say, not on our watch. Thank you very much.
Good. Excuse me. We'll take questions. As I said, we've got the microphone here to my right, and also the question cards. If you'd like to fill those out, you can hand those in. If you've got a question, just come on up to the mic so I'll know you're there and you've got a question. I want to take the prerogative of asking a first question.
Okay.
Tomorrow is UN Day, and as you've noticed, several organizations connected to the UN have helped collaborate on John's visit. So could you comment briefly on the role of the UN, what it has been, and maybe what it needs to be?
Well, the UN only will do what its member states ask it to do, particularly what the Security Council asks it to do. And if the member states on the Security Council, and all of you know that there are 15 members on the United Nations Security Council at any given time. 5 are permanent members, 10 are non-permanent members. The 10 non-permanent members are elected every 2 years. The 5 permanent members are permanently the United States, Russia, China, France, and Great Britain. If they're not pushing and pressing, then the United Nations isn't going to push and press for an end to genocide. So it's only been in the last few months, finally, that we've seen unity of purpose in the Security Council for the reasons that I told you, particularly the constellation of forces and an alliance between China and France, Britain, and the United States. So I would say that at this point, the United Nations has 2 principal roles in Sudan. The first principal role is helping to support the peace talks that are beginning at the end of this month in Libya. It's going to be a hard road. There's going to be a lot of hiccups along the way. Peace processes never occur in linear fashion. They're always zigzagging left and right. And the United Nations will have to play an important role in ensuring that those talks succeed as fast as possible for the people of Darfur. The second input that the United Nations will be fundamentally important in providing is direction as this protection force that I mentioned to you that was authorized by the United Nations Security Council finally gets deployed. The United Nations will be the key entity in ensuring that the deployment goes well. Getting the number of troops on the ground, having the equipment necessary to ensure that they succeed at their work, having the financing available, doing the command and control, providing the intelligence necessary to do the work well. All these kinds of things that will fall on the United Nations. These are huge tasks. No one else can do them. They bring the world together, bring the nations of the world together to do them. And it's indispensable as an international institution. Sure, there are room for improvement. Sure, need to always be engaged in an effort to try to improve the efficiency and the transparency of the organization. But generally, its functions, its core functions of supporting peace and security in the world are indispensable ones. And it's our job, I think, to advocate to ensure that the institution continues to become a more efficient one, continues to be more effective one, and is given the proper resources to do its job.
Great. Let's take a question from the microphone.
What do the evangelicals and the Jewish organizations that are involved hope to gain from saving Darfur?
Yeah, as far as I can tell, and I've spent years now working with people from the faith-based communities, and I don't see a personal gain. I have spent weeks in the field with evangelical leaders and with Jewish leaders in Darfur, and I never saw one hint of evidence that they were looking for some. You got a theory. Go ahead and tell us your theory.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm not talking,
Back off.
I'm not talking about the individuals working in the field.
Okay.
I'm talking about the top of these organizations.
So
definitely not the people working in the field.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about, because I usually don't. I take people over, on visits. I go with celebrities, I go with leaders, I go with politicians. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about some of the leaders of these organizations. And I'm quite amazed, frankly, at the level of commitment, faith-based commitment that they have to the issue of ending genocide. And I know they get a lot of criticism and a lot of questions about motivations, but to this day, I haven't seen personally any evidence. And certainly, if you have it, go ahead. You got the floor. But I have not seen anything other than a real commitment and desire to see an end to the kind of human suffering that's going on in Sudan. And I think it's a laudable thing. And I think the faith-based groups are the backbone of the these human rights efforts, and they're our principal allies in Washington when we want to get things done, because they're organized and they really make a difference, and they have connections, of course, as we all know, to many politicians, so they can have an impact. And when we really needed to get to Bush, when we really needed to push for a real strong response to what was happening in Darfur as it was slipping away earlier this year, it was evangelical and Jewish leaders who were calling the White House relentlessly, demanding that the administration act and demanding the leadership in the Congress, both parties, act much more robustly than they had up till now. Welcome.
Let me give you a question, one of the written questions. Sudan being an Arab country, a member of the Arab League, the action or lack of action by Arab states on the Darfur question can make a difference. Where do the other Arab states stand now?
Other or all?
Other Arab states beyond Sudan.
Oh, I see. Okay. Arab, this is the thing. We always expect more, or we expect, it's like, let me think of something here. The Arizona Cardinals. That's a bad analogy. Just think of like the team, the bottom of the barrel, and all of a sudden, you're a fan of that team. Let's take my team, the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, it's simply unreasonable for me to expect that the Kansas City Chiefs are going to win the Super Bowl this year. Equally, sorry, just having to get that off my chest. Equally, it's unreasonable for us to expect that the Arab League is going to speak out about human rights in another Arab League country. It just will never happen. As long as any of us live, if any of you got grandchildren, they are not going to be alive on the day that any Arab League member speaks out and condemns another Arab League member for human rights violations with no ulterior motive. Bring the last questioner back. You want to bring the ulterior motives. During Gulf War I, there were people that wanted to go after Iraq, but they had their reasons for it. Anyways, but generally speaking, the Arab League is not going to stand up on questions related to human rights. They can be engaged, just like China, quietly and privately, to bring to bear pressure on Sudan that is non-public, but they're not going to do it publicly. And so now the effort is, now that China and the United States and Europe have largely gone on the right side, and again, they're just moving in the right direction. We have to push and prod them much, much more. We've got to raise the temperature on China to make sure that it follows through with the initial efforts. But we're similarly trying to do the same thing with the Saudis and the Egyptians, the two countries that have more influence than others in Sudan. And so, these are countries that have peripheral influence, frankly, because the Sudanese can tell them to bugger off if they're not interested in what they got to say. But these guys will come at them, and they'll push, because the Arab League has been embarrassed by the allegations that continue to come up that say, how could they turn away from a mass slaughter of Muslim citizens and frankly, in their own backyard. So they have started to take notice of this, even though publicly they make fairly outlandish statements and support President Bashir. Privately, we've started to see some movement.
Great. Let's take another question from the microphone.
I head up a Darfur group here on campus, and we focus most of our concentration on divestment. And I'm just looking for some advice as far as there's, obviously the state divestment bill. And then also I learned from the Save Darfur Coalition over the weekend that the national divestment bill, H.R. 180, is possibly going to be voted on in the next week or so. So, and we immediately responded by getting a bunch of petition signatures to send to our senators. Along with that, is there other things that we can be doing in the next week or so to make sure that gets voted through the Senate and stays how it is?
Good. Well, it's a handful right there. You got the Senate. The House passed its bill on divestment, as you know, and so it's the Senate now that's acting. We had a hearing I testified at in the Senate Banking Committee, Chris Dodd's committee, about 2 weeks ago. The Republicans and Democrats, pretty united fashion. I mean, a couple of them had some statements that they tried to, the administration's opposed to this bill, by the way, but the Republicans tried to carry the water for a few minutes for the administration, but dropped it and finally said, we support this. So so I think we're going to get a fairly united Senate to, if it has time before the legislative calendar runs out, they will vote this out, and we'll have a bill that emerges from both the Senate and the House, and then they'll reconcile the two and send it to the President, see what happens. So I'm optimistic, but the way to do this is to just plow away with letters to your two senators here. Of course, Senator Feingold is the real leader on this issue, but it's always good to encourage and thank, and say we need the push now. And he has lots of friends up there in key committees, so you can just keep writing to him. And then your other senator, Senator Cole, he needs more support. Needs more encouragement to take the right action. So I think those are the things you can do immediately. I think the other urgent action for our Congress and our Senate, for the House and the Senate, is to ensure that the Congress fully funds this protection force that we talked about from the United Nations. The President yesterday submitted a supplemental appropriation bill with a lot of different items on it, particularly Iraq-related items, but they inserted in that supplemental bill is a $725 million appropriation for the United Nations African Union mission in Darfur. We are paying 20-some% of the mission, and other countries have to pay their share. And so it's urgent that money get appropriated quickly so that our government can provide the assistance necessary to make sure that United Nations mission gets deployed quickly. So those are the two most important things: getting that bill passed in the Senate and ensuring that the money is available for the peacekeeping mission.
Has President Bush came out against of that divestment bill, or do you think if it gets passed to the Senate quite easily, do you think he'll accept that?
Well, he personally hasn't. He's sent his administration officials from Treasury and State Department to testify against the bill, which means the administration is opposed to it. But if it's united, if it's 80 or 90 votes, the passage, it's possible, maybe likely, that he won't veto, that he'll just accept it. He'll try to get it modified in the conference, but he'll accept the bill. So I think that's why a high number of votes, getting over 80 votes from the Senate demonstrating bipartisanship is really important to ensure that you have less likelihood of the president wielding a veto.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
We got a couple of questions about the Congo. Basically summarizes, can you please comment on the conflict in Congo in comparison to Darfur in terms of non-combatants who have died, current progress on resolution?
Well, Darfur actually is not the deadliest conflict in the world today. Congo is. We've had almost 4 million people perish in the jungles in eastern Congo as a result of fighting since 1997, 1996, 97. And the war, even though formally over through a peace deal that brought a number of the neighbors to peace, and though they had an election last year, there's still low-grade, low-intensity conflict, which is undermining stability in eastern Congo. So Darfur is a genocide, in my view, because 3 groups are targeted to be eliminated in whole or in part by the government of Sudan. The Fur, the Zagawa, and the Masalit, these 3 communities. There's specific targeted intentional killing. In Congo, it's much more indiscriminate. There's fighting over control of resources. There's mass displacement every time villages get attacked. There's militias that prey upon civilian populations because the eastern part of the country has really no rule of law. And for these kinds of actions, there's total impunity. So it's our desire, at Enough and a number of other groups in Washington, that as we build this movement across the United States about Darfur, that soon we'll be able to encourage and build out beyond Darfur to Congo, so that we work in a broader sense against building a constituency of people, hopefully a permanent constituency of people who are opposed to crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide, not just genocide. And so that's our objective. We're going to work really hard to educate people about what's going on in Congo, and particularly to the women of Congo, as you have one of the highest rates of sexual assault in the world. That's not one of the highest, it's by far the highest. And the crimes being committed against women are the worst that we perhaps have ever seen, and on a mass scale, and what's happening in the Kivus in eastern Congo. So we really want to see over the next year, over the next 6 months, an effort to that would unfold to educate people, to mobilize people, just like has been undertaken for Darfur, the same for eastern Congo. And so those two, I think, are the two most pressing, most urgent conflicts and emergencies, human emergencies of our time. And they are ones that, absent our involvement and our pressing and pushing for solutions, will continue, I think, to fester and deepen without any relief.
Let's go to that microphone.
Hello, my name is Raja, and I'm a global studies major. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I have two questions and one comment. My first question is, you spoke briefly about how China is one of the countries, members of the UN Security Council, that's taking steps towards progress in the situation. But my question is, don't you see them as the biggest obstacle towards real progress due to their time and the money being spent in the infrastructure down south, especially when it comes to something called oil? And also, if China was making real progress towards, taking steps towards progress, don't you think that this stuff would be stopped right now, and that China would China would stop vetoing use of military action to stop the atrocities in Darfur by now, and that we will have a robust peacekeeping force down in country, on the ground, taking steps to stop the human rights violations or the genocide? And the second question is, what kind of peacekeeping force do we have on the ground right now that's not really doing anything to stop the human rights violations? They're just there just to be a presence, just to show the world that there's a peacekeeping force there. But how effective is this peacekeeping force when they are also being targeted and being killed by the militia groups? And then my comment is, being a former member of the U.S. military, we do have U.S. forces somewhere else in the continent of Africa who are waiting patiently, waiting impatiently for a resolution that would authorize U.S. military intervention in Darfur, and they're just anxiously waiting for the call to be called in there. But of course, China keeps saying no. That's against our best interest. And then last but not least is, I think the main reason why the U.S. is hesitant to take a larger role is because the UN would have jurisdiction, or that the African Union would have jurisdiction over U.S. troops. And then those are the people who would tell us not to use force to stop human rights violations. And that's it.
Come on, one more. I knew it. Come on, Raja.
Okay, fine. One more comment.
I knew it. You could just see it, couldn't you? Couldn't you tell it was just brewing in him?
To Somalia '93, we had forces in Somalia and Mogadishu that were ready to stop human rights violations. They witnessed it every single day, and they requested permission to engage. But guess who told them to stand down? The UN. Thank you.
This is good. This take us now. You guys all, we're going to stay till midnight, right? Cool? It's all right with you? I'm right. I'm ready. First question, if you all remember, is China. And as the biggest obstacle, you were saying, isn't it the biggest obstacle? And if they were really moving, if they were really pushing, wouldn't things have changed by now? Well, yes, China has certainly been the biggest obstacle. It has run interference for the government of Sudan for the last 4 years in the Security Council, and it has prevented more robust action from occurring. There's no question about that. And all I'm saying to you is that because, and until very recently, China had a singular foreign policy objective it was pursuing in Sudan, and that was the maintenance of its oil supply, its energy supply. And that is a national security issue for China. It imports 75% of the Sudanese oil exports, and there are billions of dollars at stake in its investments. So I think that we know what China stands for on this issue. But because of the Olympics and because of this international campaign to tar China and its image in the context of the Olympics, we've now seen a second variable enter China's calculation as it develops its policy towards Sudan. And we see that China won't get up and make a speech about the human rights violations that are committed in Sudan, but they will work quietly behind the scenes in pressing the Sudanese government to reduce the problems that they're causing, the headaches that they're causing China internationally, frankly. And I don't care what their objectives are. We're not going to change Chinese government's national security strategy, but we can affect its calculation by the noise that we make, all of us make, about the choices that China makes and that the fact that China is helping to underwrite genocide in Darfur now. So what we have is a wonderful new tool of shaming China and creating and causing an embarrassment for its coming out party in 2008. So there are all kinds of efforts that people can get involved with. That Save Darfur Coalition would be the best one to check in with to find out about the kind of actions that you can get involved with to ensure that China knows that they're not going to get a free pass in 2008. And I think we're going to see more and more positive actions. We won't hear anything from them of a positive nature. They'll continuously defend the government of Sudan publicly because they're their commercial ally. But privately, we're going to see them act more and more robustly as time gets closer and closer to the Olympics. If nothing is happening on the ground in Darfur, we're going to see China raise the temperature for Khartoum in its policy as it tries to get at least a temporary resolution of the crisis while the Olympics are going on. So that's the first question. The second one is what force is on the ground now? You know, what is going on with this force? There is a force on the ground now. It's called the African Union. Africa, when no one else chose to step up, when the politicians in every capital city around the world decided it's not enough of a priority for us to go and send troops to protect civilians in Darfur, the Africans stepped up. They've sent now 7,000 troops. Not a lot, but it's something. But the promise that was given to the African troops was the Americans and the Europeans and the Japanese would give money and equipment to the troops in order to make their mission a successful one. And we haven't lived up to that promise. Every 6 months or so, the African Union has to go around passing the hat begging for more money because there's no automatic funding of African Union peacekeeping missions. For the UN, there is. The UN has an automatic funding mechanism. So there's an assessed contribution. The United States is assessed around 28% of every peacekeeping mission when it's authorized by the United Nations. But if it's just an African Union or some other regional organization mission, then it's just an ad hoc financing thing. And we've not come through with the money and the financing. And these troops often go a month or two without rations. They haven't had the equipment. You mentioned that they came under fire, under attack just 2 weeks ago. There was a terrible incident where 11 or 12 of the peacekeepers were killed. And they ran out of bullets defending themselves. So it's shameful, frankly, what's happened. But it's demonstrated also the overwhelming importance of getting the United Nations involved from the beginning as a superstructure for any effort that goes on with respect to peacekeeping and peace enforcement. You've got to have the United Nations involved because there already is a system for financing and equipping. And that system is sadly lacking for African Union. So we saw the results of that. Been a terrible failure, but it's not a failure of the African Union. In my view, it's a failure of the larger international community to provide the resources necessary for soldiers who are out there on the front lines to do their jobs. Third issue you brought up is the fact that American troops are on the ground in Africa today. There is a fairly significant deployment of forces in the country of Djibouti. I assume that's what you're talking about. The U.S. has a camp there where 1,800 American soldiers, 1,700 American soldiers are stationed now at any given time, and their principal objective and purpose, and I've been there many times and spoken with the officers and rank and file, is collection of intelligence and information as part and parcel of the war on terrorism, particularly looking at Al-Qaeda and some of the affiliated organizations in East Africa, particularly in Somalia and along the Indian Ocean coast. And your contention that the sentiment of the guys is that they were, seeing the situation in Darfur unfold and having a capable force, one country away from where these genocide is being perpetrated, that they want to go and help. That's typical, isn't it? It's fantastically typical that, just like Americans all over the country are writing letters and sending money, that our troops want to go and help and stop this genocide. But politically, for 5,000 reasons, that's not even an issue that's being discussed. The United States government, the Defense Department, particularly, and the Vice President's office, have made it abundantly clear that it is off limits to discuss the deployment of U.S. forces or even the diversion of U.S. high-value military equipment to any other theater of the world besides our two main theaters, Iraq and Afghanistan. That is just non-negotiable. Rumsfeld said it publicly a number of times. We're not providing any resources to anyone else. We've got to focus on the main theaters. And no one has yet to defeat the DOD Vice President axis within the, I'm leaving out the adjective, within this administration. And I think there are many people within the administration who want to do a lot more. And I know a lot of them. And they've fought and pressed and pushed within the interagency to do more. But bam, because of defense and the Vice President's office on this issue of all hands on deck for Iraq, and because of the CIA and its counterterrorism relationship with the Sudanese government, it's been very, very hard for the interagency process, the various cabinet officials, to come to any agreement around what to do. And that's why, ultimately, and I learned it the hard way when I worked for the last president, it's only when the president reaches down and breaks through that logjam and says, this is what I've decided, now we're going to act. And he's the chief decider, don't forget. So he decided that the administration was going to overcome its divisions and its other interests with respect to counterterrorism, with respect to not wanting to rattle China, with respect to Iraq, and we're going to do a lot more in Sudan. They're not going to send troops, but they're going to support that deployment of the UN. They're going to be much more engaged in the peace process, and they're going to be willing to create a cost. Remember, we talked about the 3 Ps, that third P, to punish the crime of genocide and to lead efforts multilaterally. It's not the dramatic solution that some would want to see, where we go in, take out the offending party because they've committed 2 million, been responsible for 2 million deaths in the South, 400,000 dead in Darfur. If there's ever a place that people might advocate regime change, this is it. But that's not in the cards. That's not politically feasible right now. So we have to look at the tools that are realistic. And one of them, and a number of them, the United States can be key in providing support for. So, U.S. hesitations. 5. Well, did we go Somalia? Do we have time to talk about Somalia?
Let me give you some.
That's another lecture. When am I coming back tomorrow?
Well, yeah. I was about to put you into the lightning round where we have now rapid fire questions for
Okay.
you.
Wow, exciting.
So I've got a couple here that,
Ding,
that
ding.
maybe, well, we'll give you 30 seconds to for it. And we do have our informal discussion coming up next. So, Rico, if you want to wait for that, do that. If you've got a quick one, we can take it now.
Because it more relates to your exposure to Africa. And it's, I can.
Okay. So a couple quick questions. First is on the issue of divestment. Which companies do business? The question wants to know what businesses do business with Sudan that a state like Wisconsin might be holding securities in, and maybe more generally though, what are some of the companies that are targeted? That's question one. Two is.
Can I do one at a time?
Yeah, you can do
really
one at a time. I know
these
it's the
things.
whole memory.
Here's the news flash from Wall Street Journal the last couple of days is that we all know, or maybe most of you know, hopefully, that the biggest company in the world, biggest corporation in the world is ExxonMobil. The second biggest corporation in the world until 3 days ago was General Electric. And it was just displaced, it was just lapped. I mean lapped by the new number two, which is a company called PetroChina, which is the biggest company in China, the biggest oil company, biggest energy company in China. PetroChina is the biggest investor in Sudan. PetroChina is routinely owned by most mutual funds, Fidelity, Vanguard, T. Rowe Price, all of the main Fidelity of the mutual fund houses that most of us have our either retirement funds or any kind of savings in. And so PetroChina is the company that has been targeted by we've started to target specific investment houses. In addition to the state divestment, like we were talking about Wisconsin, in addition to universities divesting, and a number of state universities and private institutions have divested their funds. Now people are looking at individual companies and how they invest their money in companies doing business in Sudan. And it turns out that one of the biggest offenders is Fidelity, and there was a big push over the last year by Save Darfur and a number of other organizations. And finally, although Fidelity, from the beginning, Fidelity said we're never going to sell, they finally decided to sell over 1 billion shares of stock in the companies that they owned, that were a targeted select list of companies that they owned that were doing business with Sudan, that were helping to underwrite genocide, PetroChina being one of the largest ones. Similarly, many of you know Berkshire Hathaway, you know Warren Buffett. We sent a whole delegation of people to Omaha to Mr. Buffett's annual party, his shareholder meeting, and a shareholder what do you call those things? Resolution was introduced to ask Berkshire Hathaway to sell the stock of companies doing business in Sudan, particularly his major holding, which he was a major holder of PetroChina. He'd been a major buyer over the last 5 years and accumulated huge amounts of money, hundreds of millions of dollars. And he very strongly told the assembled there in Omaha that he would never allow his investment decisions to be guided by anything but the bottom line for his shareholders. And people went away discouraged, of course, the human rights activists in the room. But weeks later, we started to see filings within the SEC. Turns out Mr. Buffett made a decision to sell everything. He sold it all. He sold all his PetroChina. He got rid of it. He said, I don't want this headache. I don't want these activists buzzing around me causing problems. So this is the kind of impact, that people can have. You think you lose and you win because people simply don't want to be tarnished by some measure of association with genocide. And I think we can do it. I think if we get enough of these mutual fund houses in states like Wisconsin and universities to sell the stocks, they're going to affect the share prices of these companies. And nobody's going to want to invest in companies whose share prices are unstable or questionable or on a downward trend. And the countries like China, whose companies are now all of a sudden being affected on their bottom line, will press even harder to ensure the policies that are causing that change to occur to be reversed. So I'm optimistic that if we press even harder now with these divestment campaigns and with the efforts to humiliate and embarrass and shame China for what it's doing, and to press the administration to do more and follow through on its promises and on its use of the term genocide, I think that we can actually bring about a change fairly rapidly in the behavior of the regime in Khartoum and the calculations of the regime in Khartoum. There are domino effects that occur in foreign policy, as you can see in international relations. And the smallest action that is taken by a group of people like us, once those dominoes start falling, tuk, 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 you get a guy who's one of the richest people in the world saying, you know what, sell it all. I mean, that's just incredible to me. Because a ragtag group of people, sorry to use that term, a ragtag group of people just showed up at an investor conference and made a moral case to the people in the room. And enough of those people said, you know what, you're right, we shouldn't let our money facilitate genocide. What are you doing about this, Mr. Buffett? It worked on him. So we can only imagine a man of that nerve, which he has nerve if he has nothing else, that it's going to work with other companies too when we target them.
That was a great answer, and you're really bad at the lightning round. I just want you to know.
Sorry.
Well, let me just remind you, so we're going to take a short break, and then we can come back and we'll have a more informal discussion here. Before we do that, please give a warm thank you to John Prendergast.
That was good. That's great. I was hoping that was the answer. So we're going to take a little minute. We'll form some chairs up here in the front. Those that want to stay, please do. If you need to go, please do that as well.
At the perfect time. I was starting to slip.